Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur Showcase Series brought to you by Patranya Media LLC and Parkway Media Partners. I'm your host, Patranya Poonswan, and today we have a very special guest in studio. Her name is Franchesca Van Buren. She is the CEO and founder of Insight Therapy Solutions. Franchesca, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm so excited to be here.
So great to have you in studio, and we're here to talk about your business that has is actually a very, I think, especially in the last few years, become something that is critical for so many people in the community, and it's based right here in Las Vegas. But what's really great about it is it's offered to patients all over the country, probably outside the country as well, right? So talk to me about Insight Therapy Solutions. Apparently, obviously, therapy is a big part of your business, right?
Yes. So we are a mental health clinic. But it's only talk therapy. So we don't prescribe medication.
Oh.
We just do talk therapy.
Okay.
And we do have a couple of offerings that we just rolled out. The first is a behavioral health coaching program, which is still along the same vein as talk therapy. And then another one is a wellness program that we actually have created internally for our own staff members, and we're packaging it to offer it to other employers as well, because it's been kind of an amazing thing for us within our company.
Yeah.
And so
talk therapy, if people are not familiar with that, how is it different from other kind of therapy that's out there? Obviously, it seems like the most basic, but also very needed type of therapy, right?
Well, so when I say talk therapy, I'm talking about counseling, and that could be many different types of counseling. Therapists have lots of different tools in their toolbox. So they have, CBT, they have EMDR. There's so many different types of therapy that therapists can utilize. And so when I say talk therapy, I say those words because it makes sense to a lot of people. Instead of just saying counseling, talk therapy, because there's no medication involved. It's just talking. You're talking to your therapist who's a licensed clinician who, maybe is a psychologist or an LCSW, a clinical professional counselor. But it's you're talking through your problems in order to get to a solution.
Yeah. And, and therapy, and, when I've done interviews regarding this issue, especially when it comes to mental health in the last few years, especially with COVID and people turning to needing help, and therapy is among that. And I think what's really interesting, and maybe you just kind of go back a little bit in your story, is how, going now virtually and telehealth, and how that's become a big part of your business, especially in the last few years, because you started this back in 2012, and that wasn't as big in telehealth at the time. You actually had an office in California, right?
So we actually started with a little trailer in Indian Springs, Nevada.
Oh, Nevada,
which is
yeah.
Where I grew up. And we started providing services out there in Indian Springs. There was no office space.
And you grew up, and that's where you're from originally, too,
yes,
right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And it started out as an after-school program for kids who were struggling. And it was very difficult in those days, because if you lived in a rural location or if you didn't have access to transportation, you had very limited resources. In Indian Springs, there were no resources for mental health. There were very few social services.
I mean, how small was Indian Springs? How many people were in that town?
Oh man, I don't know.
It's a very small
1,500 maybe. Yeah,
Wow.
It's very tiny.
Yeah.
The school, I think the graduating class had like maybe 20 kids.
Wow.
And it was K through 12, and it was very, very small school.
But you knew that there was a need there, obviously, for those kids in that school system.
Yes, it's when I grew up, things were rough out there, but 10 years ago they had gotten even worse, and just a community that was struggling.
Right.
A lot of kids on free or low cost lunch at school, and a lot of kids didn't live with their parents. They lived with grandma or maybe an aunt or uncle, and just a lot of people struggling in that community.
So you are, by the way, you're an attorney. That was your background, but you saw the need for therapy, so you started this. Did you have local therapists there at the time to help you start this process in Indian Springs?
No, it was so challenging. So I when the company started, I had a partner who was he had provided BST and PSR services in Las Vegas, and that's a type of it's a type of therapy that can be done by somebody with a high school degree or a bachelor's degree in psychology, and then they have to have some training. And when I say after school program, that is what we were providing, was these services to kids, basic skills training. So, teaching them about hygiene, teaching them about budgeting, teaching them about, how to take care of themselves, because these were kids that were in really difficult situations. And, parents were struggling to put food on the table, or maybe they were struggling with addictions, or, so many things that people struggle with, right? And so these basic things sometimes fell through the cracks. And psychosocial rehabilitation is a little bit closer to therapy, where you're really giving people coping skills. You're helping them. How do you deal with stress? How do you deal with difficult situations in your life? So it's the building blocks that also can come out in therapy, but it's not quite therapy, right? It's something that is very complementary to it. And when we had our program out there, it had to be overseen by licensed therapists. And so what would happen is they would come out to Indian Springs, and they would set up in our trailer in one of the little rooms, and the kids would come in for 5 minutes to see the therapist. And I thought to myself, okay, well, I'm not a therapist, but what kind of therapy are you doing in 5 minutes? And these kids were really struggling. I mean, they came from just very difficult backgrounds. So I said to myself, well, this can't be right. I mean, I know I'm not a therapist, but there has to be a better way. So I learned about the billing for therapy, and I learned how to change the structure of our company so that we would be able to bill Medicaid for therapy services, so that I could, directly have a contract with a therapist, so that I could ensure it's not going to be 5 minutes. It's going to be, maybe it's going to be 30 minutes, maybe it's going to be 45 minutes, maybe it's going to be an hour, but it's, you're actually going to help these kids. So that's where the genesis came from. I don't have a background in mental health, but, I just wanted to help the kids in Indian Springs, and part of that is you got to have quality control. So I made sure that that's what we had. And then, back to your original question, which was about the telehealth. Back in those days, internet was just, it was not very good. Out in Indian Springs especially we had satellites. And you probably remember, I don't know if you remember dial-up, but it was worse than dial-up. I mean, satellite internet, terrible. So you can't do video conferences. Back then, you couldn't do video telehealth. And also, back then, the insurance companies would not reimburse for phone calls. So these it wasn't just Indian Springs. I mean, it was people in all rural locations, right? I mean, it's people go to school, they get their advanced degrees, they get their licensure, they want to go work in the big cities where it's exciting, and, frankly, the pay is higher. And also, there's more opportunities in every respect. Let's say you're looking for a partner. If you go to a rural location, it's slim pickings, right? Because it's, by definition, there aren't very many people there. So people all over rural America, people all over the rural world have had a really hard time accessing these types of services. So, like I said, back then, we couldn't do telehealth, and it was really hard. I had my first therapist that I ever hired. She would drive 2 hours each way to go see the kids out in Indian Springs. And, I mean, she was amazing. We were so blessed to have her, but that wears you down. And so, it just wasn't sustainable for us, unfortunately.
So that was back in 2012, and it's pretty amazing because you started this with such a, it's a small vision, but also big at the same time, because you want to help as many people as possible. So tell me, how did that come from just working from this trailer in Indian Springs to this service now that you basically have therapists all over the country working with clients all over the country? How did you make that transition successfully and making it, like you said, more sustainable? Telehealth was a big part of it too, right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. So obviously we all went through this terrible thing called COVID.
Yeah.
It was devastating for the entire world. And there were a couple of good things that came from it. The first was all of a sudden we recognized the need, like how important healthcare is, and also how important mental health care is, kind of as a secondary thing.
Yeah.
But what happened was a lot of the regulations for cross-border practicing were lifted. So states are very strict about who they allow to work within the state, right? So if you have a professional license in the United States, generally you can only work in whatever state you received your license in.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of cooperation between the states for reciprocity. Mm-hmm. So COVID hit, all of a sudden, there were pockets of the country that were really, really hard hit, and they needed healthcare providers. So all of a sudden, there was a huge outcry, and everybody said, well, why are we creating all these barriers? These people, they are, they've got the right education, they've been licensed in one state, we're all one country, and we're all suffering, so let's make it easier for people. So they did, and it was this like revolutionary, crazy thing that happened during COVID, where these regulations were lifted, and I saw that. But backing up a little bit, we did have a physical location for many years. We had a physical location. We did not do telehealth; it was not our thing.
And this was in Pahrump, right?
Well, our first location was in Indian Springs, and then we expanded to Pahrump.
Yeah.
But then I just struggled to get fully licensed therapists out to my rural locations. The way that a lot of clinics do it is they staff their rural locations with interns, which, it's very important. We have to train our interns, but they have to be trained correctly, and you have to have oversight. Right. I think everybody agrees about that. And for me, I felt that I just could not ensure the correct experience for them, because in those days, the technology wasn't where it needed to be.
Yeah.
So we ended up closing those locations and consolidating in Las Vegas. So we had one physical location in Las Vegas. I think I had maybe 5 therapists when COVID hit.
Yeah.
And I just didn't feel like I couldn't keep them safe. When you're in a therapy room, it's a fairly small room. Right. I didn't have the ability to equip each room with special ventilation and all of the things that in the beginning we were so scared, we didn't know what was happening. So I said, okay, let's try telehealth. The technology is a little bit better. I mean, I was scared. I was so scared.
And this was right in the beginning of COVID when this happened.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, in fact, the very first therapist I ever hired, the one who drove 2 hours to Indian Springs, she still worked for me. And she was in her 70s, and her husband was in his 80s, and he was medically fragile. And I thought to I made so many decisions for the company thinking about her and her situation. Yeah. And I was like, I have to keep her safe. I have to keep her family safe. So we shut it down. I said, okay, we're going to, I mean, it was difficult because our software that we had practice management software. It wasn't set up for telehealth. So we had to very quickly, from one week to the next, figure out how to completely change our business model. And I mean, so many businesses did. Probably every business did during COVID. I mean, we all had to.
But you said, in a way, it's become a blessing for you and how it turned your business around to where it is today. And we wanted to share your website here where people can go through for more information. And just looking at the number of therapists who are working for you, when you started with that just one, and now you have how many therapists working with your?
I think we're at about 45 with the ones we're onboarding. So
that has grown, and they're not just here in Nevada; they're all over the country.
Yes,
right?
Correct.
So what do you think it was kind of obviously that was the turning point, but what was kind of the secret that made you be able to expand and become sustainable? Obviously, technology and finding that right technology was a big part of this.
Well, kind of.
And finding the right people.
Technology in the healthcare world is far behind the times. And so we're actually in the process, we're building our own software.
Okay.
But technology had come very far from those days when we were in Indian Springs.
Yeah.
And so it was possible. It wasn't perfect, but it was possible. And the amazing thing was, I thought, oh my God, this is the end of Insight. People are going to hate it. People didn't hate it. They loved it. They absolutely loved it.
And you hear this from your patients.
I mean, the proof is in the numbers. 3 months after we went telehealth, our retention rates had increased 10%.
Wow.
That's huge.
What does that say about what people were needing at the time, even though the technology, you were still catching up to it, but people were responding, right?
Well, I mean, those days, they were so dark. And they were dark for everyone in the entire world. And that was horrible. It was awful that we went through that. But it also created this environment where almost every single person in the world felt anxiety. They felt depressed.
Yeah.
They felt, just this overwhelming pain.
And a universal experience.
It was a universal experience. And all of a sudden, people who didn't believe about mental health were like, oh my gosh, like I get it now.
Yeah.
And there was such an outcry for people to get help that regulations were lifted. There was so much less stigma in the world after that happened.
That was a big thing. Yeah.
I mean, it was huge. And then in telehealth, it was almost like everybody had a therapist, that they were contacting via telehealth. So it was now normal to use telehealth. Okay. It was now normal to do therapy. So for us, our business has grown so much since COVID hit, and it's because it was the perfect storm.
So, like you said, even though you have a coaching aspect of your business as well. Talk to us about that. Is that coaching for the therapists coming in to work with you, or how does that work?
So, in my practice, we accept insurance. We're on almost every insurance panel. Okay. And that is very important to me because that increases access to services. So, people pay a lot of money for their health insurance. It's very expensive, and they want to use their benefits. Yeah. And the reality is that, insurance companies really are not good about reimbursing very well for these services. And in my opinion, they don't really want to pay for it. Yeah. And so most therapists do not accept insurance. And so you have very few therapists, period. But then you have a much smaller subset that are willing to accept insurance. And so, there's this overwhelming need. People need access to mental health services, but they also need it in a way that's affordable. Right. Otherwise, it's not accessible. Yeah. It doesn't matter how many therapists there are if it's too expensive. And frankly, $150 or $200 a session, let's say you're going to see your therapist 4 times a month, that is so much money. Yeah. And prices have increased dramatically everywhere. So I really struggled with this, and I thought, okay, well, what else can I do? Because I am hiring as many therapists as I can, as quickly as I can, the right therapists. Right. But it's still very difficult, and like I say, there just aren't. There's just a lot of barriers with that. Yeah. So we created a behavioral health coaching program to fill a need that I saw, which was we see all types of clients who have all types of mental health issues, depression, anxiety, couples counseling, but also people who have personality disorders, who have, more serious things. But there's a lot of things that can become more serious if they're not addressed quickly. Right. There's a lot of, I think we all need a helping hand sometimes. And if you can't afford regular therapy, you might fall through the cracks, and then you might get worse.
So the coaching is for people to come in and help in that aspect of your business?
So our coaching program is it's cash pay, but it's incredibly affordable. It's $50 a month, and you get 2 video sessions with a coach, and you get unlimited texting and emailing with your coach. Okay. And so the services that the coach provides are basically, it's like the lowest level of what you would see in the therapy continuum. So let's say psychiatric hospitalization is up here. Then you have residential treatment here. Then you have intensive outpatient, which is 3 days a week. And then you have therapy, which is 1 day a week. Right. And then, maybe you need just something, a little helping hand, maybe just somebody to help you navigate some challenges. Maybe you lost your job and you're starting to spiral, right? Maybe you need somebody to say, hey, you know what, we got this. Let's put a list together of, where are you going to apply? What is your day going to look like? When you wake up in the morning, what is the first thing you're going to do? Maybe have your coffee and then sit down and, take a look at the job boards. Which job boards are you going to look at?
Yeah.
So it's really helping people kind of structure a way out of difficult situations
and you
that they're
bring up
facing.
a good point, because there's so many different clients, the needs are so different.
Yes.
So you're doing this to kind of respond to the different needs that are out there, which is really interesting. And we want to make sure that people know what types of services are out there. And as you said, there are different levels that you offer. So if people are listening to this and they say, okay, I'm not sure what type of therapy I need right now, whether it's coaching or more higher tier, is that what they can call you right away and call your office and say, okay, can you help me determine what I need?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we actually also provide something that I think is very unusual in the industry, and we provide these matchmaking sessions. So a client or a potential client can book a matchmaking session right on the website.
Okay.
And they can call in and say, hey, I'm experiencing, let's say...
And this is there a charge to that, to just kind of set this up?
No.
Okay. It's like a consultation.
It's a consultation.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just to say, hey, this is what I'm dealing with.
Right.
This is my insurance. This is my financial situation. Can you guys do anything for me?
Okay.
And, at that point, the matchmaker can say, hey, you know what? I think you're the perfect candidate for therapy, and I've got the perfect therapist for you. This is, this person has this background, and, they specialize in exactly the issues that you're facing. Or it might be, hey, you know what, I understand that you don't have insurance, and, you're kind of struggling a little bit right now, but it doesn't sound like it's that severe yet. So why don't we start you with a coach? Why don't we start you with the behavioral health program and see how that goes?
And there's no contract. People can stay on as long as they feel they need or they could afford it.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And, just to sum this up, obviously this is something that I think if people are interested, they need to call and get more information, what you can offer. So is it 100% telehealth now, or do you actually have an office that people can go to and meet someone?
Well, I wish we were 100% telehealth. We were 100% telehealth for about 3 years. But we ended up opening up an office again in... I think it was February of this year.
In Las Vegas here, yeah?
In Las Vegas, yeah. Basically to deal with requirements of the Nevada Board of Social Work for training interns.
Got it.
So they're wanting their interns to have a hybrid experience, so not just telehealth, but also face-to-face.
But that's just for training. The patients don't actually go to this office for therapy.
Oh, no, they do.
Oh,
yes.
they get it too.
But it's just, when I say training, I'm just talking about our interns. And interns are... They already have their master's degrees. They could potentially have their PhDs.
Yeah.
Depends on what track they're going through. They're just working on their clinical hours.
Got it.
And so these are therapists who are they're full-fledged therapists. They know what they're doing. But like I said, the Nevada Board of Social Work wants them to see people in an office. So.
Got it.
Our clients can choose, do they want to, if they live in Las Vegas and if it's convenient for them, do they want to go into an office, or do they just want to do telehealth? And, I would say even now, most people prefer the telehealth. They don't want to go into the office.
Yeah. And you say that's helped so many patients who probably would not have access to this if it weren't for the telehealth factor of your service.
Absolutely. And I have tried so many different things. When we were in the office, it was really sad during the summer because a lot of our clients would drop off. And we see a lot of Medicaid clients. So these are clients who, maybe don't have a car.
Yeah.
They don't have access to transportation. They don't have money to pay for an Uber. And so during the summer, we had a lot of clients who had serious medical conditions, and they just could not get on the bus. They couldn't wait out in the sun. It just was impossible for them. And then, so what did they do for 3 months, 4 months? They would come back to us, but they were not in great shape at the end of the summer. And that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. And it's, I think your service is just so needed. And so tell me again, maybe we'll bring up your website for people to see here. If they're watching this podcast, where can they go? And if they need help right now, they can go to your website and they can find all the information, including information about the therapists who work for you as well.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
InsightTherapySolutions.com.
Okay, perfect. And you are open, obviously and you say you have an office here in Vegas, but if they can do telehealth, obviously that is what you offer, which is kind of your bread and butter in a way, and you're getting out. Anything I haven't asked, you want to make sure that people know about this business and where you go from here in 2023?
Well, I think it's just as a society, telehealth has, in my opinion, really improved a lot of people's lives. And I think that there is now kind of a backlash by some people against telehealth and against remote work and, against a lot of the advances that we made during COVID. And I think there were a lot of advances. I mean, Uber, there was the supermarket delivery that, now I do supermarket delivery every day.
Right.
So many conveniences that really changed our lives for the better.
Yeah.
But I think, especially with telehealth makes healthcare and mental health care so accessible for so many more people. I think there's a lot of forces that are working to kind of shut that down. So I think that as a society, we really need to let our politicians know, hey, this is something that I believe in. This is something that's important to me. Please support it in the future. So luckily, Nevada is I love Nevada. This is what a wonderful place we live in.
Yeah.
But Nevada has a law on the books that says that insurance companies cannot treat telehealth any differently than face-to-face services. Yeah. So, there's that, but not every state has that on the books. Right. And we still have issues with regulation where, it just takes a long time. If somebody is licensed in another state, it takes a long time to get them licensed here. Why? Why do we make it so difficult? Why can't we help lift those restrictions the way we did during the COVID emergency? Yeah. Because let's not kid ourselves. We are still in a mental health crisis in this country. Yeah. There aren't enough providers. Why have those barriers? I don't understand.
And I think that's a good way to wrap this up, that there's still work to do, but obviously you are making those services much more accessible to your patients. And thank you so much for all you do. And Franchesca Buren, again, she's the CEO and founder of Insight Therapy Solutions. If people want more information, they can go to your website, insighttherapysolutions.com. And thank you for all you do. And thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Franchesca. And thank you so much for watching and listening to this episode of Entrepreneur Showcase Series. And we'll see you again next time.